The holographic display flickered to life in the heart of the Thessari flagship burning claw, casting harsh amber light across the command chamber's obsidian walls. High Commander Eric settled into his throne, each of his 4 arms resting on surfaces worn smooth by generations of warriors before him. His exoskeleton bore the scars of conquest, acid burns from the Velgoth hives, plasma scoring from the Centauri resistance, the distinctive claw marks of Dracorian honor duels. 63 worlds had fallen before his fleet. 63 civilizations had learned that when the Thessari came, surrender was the only wisdom. The transmission that played before him now, intercepted from the primitive edges of the galaxy, should have been beneath his notice. His communication officer, a young warrior named Kresh, whose carapace still gleamed with the fresh sheen of recent molting, had brought it to him as a curiosity. Something to laugh at during the long cycles between conquests. Eric watched the humans attempt to communicate. The creatures stood upright on 2 legs, inefficient, unstable, their bodies covered in thin fabric rather than proper armor plating. Their skin looked soft, almost translucent in places, showing the blue tracery of blood vessels beneath. No claws, no mandibles, no defensive spines or poison sacs or any of the basic survival features that marked a species worthy of the stars. "Play it again," Eric commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber in the subsonic frequencies that made junior warriors' plates rattle with instinctive submission. The human on the screen spoke in its primitive language, translated by the ship's computer into proper Thessari clicks and hisses. "Greetings from the people of Earth. We come in peace, seeking friendship and knowledge among the stars. We are explorers, scientists, dreamers. We hope." Eric's laughter cut through the message, a sound like stones grinding together. Around the command chamber, his senior officers joined in, mandibles clacking in amusement. The human continued its pathetic speech, talking about cooperation and shared discovery, about building bridges between worlds, about the beauty of diversity in the cosmos. "Dreamers," Eric repeated, tasting the word like something rotten. "They call themselves dreamers." He rose from his throne, his full height nearly 3 meters, his shadow falling across the hologram like a prophecy of conquest. "Kresh, what did the xenobiology scan reveal about their homeworld?" The younger warrior brought up the data with eager efficiency. "High Commander, their planet is a paradise. Abundant water, moderate temperatures, diverse food sources, gravity 0.97 standard well within comfort range, atmospheric composition near optimal." Kresh's mandibles spread in what passed for a Thessari smile. "No megapredators, no toxic zones, no survival pressures of any significance. They evolved in a garden, Commander. A soft, gentle garden." Eric felt something twist in his primary stomach. Not quite anger, not quite contempt, but something closer to offense. The Thessari had clawed their way to sentience on Thessar Prime, where the very air burned with sulfuric compounds during storm season. Where hatchlings emerged into pools of liquid metal, swimming for the cooler caverns or dying in superheated agony within their first hour of life. Where adolescent Thessari fought their siblings for food, for territory, for the simple right to survive another cycle. 3 of Eric's own clutchmates had fallen before their first molting. He'd eaten one of them himself when starvation made mercy irrelevant. These humans had never known real hardship, never tested themselves against a universe that wanted them dead. They had simply stumbled into consciousness on their gentle world, surrounded by resources, and now they had the audacity to reach for the stars as if they belonged there. What are their military capabilities? Eric asked, though he already knew the answer would amuse him. Primitive kinetics, early fusion technology, no shield systems we could detect. Kresh pulled up images of human spacecraft, ungainly things that looked more like industrial equipment than proper warships. Their largest vessels are colony transports and mining ships. We detected no dedicated battle fleet, no orbital defense platforms, no evidence they've even conceptualized real warfare. Because they've never needed to, another officer said, her voice carrying the particular rasp of someone who'd survived multiple combat molds. No predators on their world means no predator instincts in their psychology. They're prey species, Commander. Herd animals that got lucky with opposable thumbs. Eric stared at the frozen image of the human on the display. It had been smiling in that strange way mammals did, showing its flat, grinding teeth. Herbivore teeth. Teeth made for plants, not for tearing meat from still living prey. Everything about these creatures screamed weakness. Their soft skin would tear under even a juvenile's claws. Their fragile bones would snap like dried vegetation. Their slow reflexes and single pair of manipulating limbs would leave them helpless against proper warriors. And yet, they'd reached the stars. Somehow, these soft garden dwellers had developed technology, had built ships, had sent their message out into the void expecting what? Friendship? Did they truly believe the galaxy operated on their naive principles of cooperation? "Hi, Commander," Kresh said, interrupting his thoughts. "Your orders?" Eric felt his primary combat reflex glands pulse, flooding his system with the chemical rush that preceded battle. But this wasn't battle. Not really. Battle implied opponents of roughly equal capability, warriors testing themselves against worthy challenges. This would be more like harvesting. Like when young Thesari were sent to clear out the rock gnars from the lower caverns, creatures too stupid to flee, even as they were systematically exterminated. Still, even rock gnars served a purpose. They taught young warriors how to kill without hesitation, how to coordinate attacks, how to trust in the strength of carapace and claw. This human world, with its abundant resources and its population of soft, unarmed civilians, would make an excellent training ground. His newly molted warriors needed combat experience before the next real campaign. The humans would provide that experience. "Prepare the invasion fleet," Eric commanded. 12 warships. The newer vessels, crews that haven't blooded themselves yet. We'll use this as a training exercise. He paused, considering. And send a response to their transmission. It would be discourteous to conquer them without proper warning. "What message should we send, High Commander?" Kresh asked. Eric's mandibles spread wide. "Tell them the Thesari have received their greeting. Tell them we're coming to teach them how the real galaxy operates. Tell them..." He thought of his own hatchling days, the brutal lessons learned in blood and pain. Tell them they're about to learn what it means to face a species that was born dying. The message was sent within the hour, transmitted on the same frequencies the humans had used for their cheerful greeting. Eric didn't wait for a response. What would prey animals say when warned that predators were coming? They would panic, or they would plead. Either way, their words were irrelevant. Admiral Sarah Morgan stood on the observation deck of the UESS Endeavour, humanity's flagship and the pinnacle of 4 generations of spacefaring engineering. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the infinite black, storms swirling across the Pacific, the Terminator line dividing day from night across Africa and Europe. Somewhere down there, 7 billion people went about their lives, unaware that their species had just been handed a death sentence by creatures they'd never even heard of until 72 hours ago. "Play it again," she said quietly. Her executive officer, Commander James Okoye, activated the holographic display without comment. He'd been with her for 6 years, had served under her during the Titan colony crisis and the belt mining wars. He knew when she was thinking and when she needed to see something again to confirm what her instincts were already telling her. The alien appeared in the air before them, a nightmare of chitinous plates and too many limbs, its voice translated by humanity's best AI systems into flat, effectless English. "The Thesari have received your greeting. We are coming to teach you how the real galaxy operates. You are about to learn what it means to face a species that was born dying." The transmission ended. The hologram faded. Morgan stared at the empty air where the alien's image had been and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. She'd learned during the resource wars that fear was just adrenaline waiting for direction. Not anger either, though that would come later. What she felt was a kind of weary recognition, the sense of seeing an old pattern repeat itself. "They think we're soft," she said. "Ma'am?" Okoye stepped closer, his own reflection ghosting across the viewport beside hers. "They looked at our message. Peace, friendship, cooperation, and they saw weakness." Morgan pulled up the xenobiology report on her datapad, scanning the information humanity's deep space probes had managed to gather about the Thesari and their homeworld. Sulfuric atmosphere, metal pool spawning grounds, sibling combat as standard childhood development. They evolved in hell, so they assume paradise breeds cowards. That's a dangerous assumption on their part. "It is," Morgan agreed. She thought about her own childhood in post-collapse Singapore, where rising seas had swallowed half the city, and survivors fought over fresh water. She thought about her grandmother's stories of the Third World War, the nuclear winter that followed, the desperate scramble for resources that had killed 2 billion people. She thought about humanity's long, bloody history of finding new and innovative ways to kill each other right up until the day they'd finally learned to direct that creativity towards survival instead of self-destruction. Paradise. These aliens thought Earth was paradise. They had no idea what humans had done to their gentle garden world, how close they'd come to rendering it uninhabitable through sheer short-sighted violence. And they certainly had no idea what humans had learned from nearly destroying themselves. "Get me the Security Council," Morgan said, "and wake up everyone at Strategic Command. I want every defensive platform, every railgun, every missile silo, and every combat-capable vessel in the system on full alert." She paused. "And get me the civilian mining consortiums. Tell them we're going to need their equipment." Okoye's eyebrows rose. "Mining equipment, ma'am." "The Thesari are about to learn something important about humans, Commander." Morgan turned from the viewport, her jaw set. "We didn't evolve claws because we learned to make better ones. We didn't need armor plating because we learned to build it. And we didn't develop predator instincts because we became the most effective persistence predators this galaxy has ever seen." She pulled up a tactical display, showing the projected approach vector of the alien fleet. "They think they're coming to teach us about the real galaxy. They're wrong. We're going to teach them why nothing on Earth could kill us." 20 minutes later, Morgan sat in the command center's central hub, surrounded by holographic displays showing military readiness across the solar system. The Security Council members appeared on their individual screens. President Morrison from the North American Union, Chancellor Novak from the Pacific Coalition, Prime Minister Okonkwo from the African Federation, and representatives from every other major power bloc humanity had managed to build after nearly tearing itself apart. We've all seen the threat analysis, Morgan began without preamble. 12 warships, technology approximately 30 years ahead of ours in shield systems and power generation. They're treating this as a training exercise. They think we'll surrender when we see what they can do. Maybe we should, Morrison said, his face pale. If they're that much more advanced. They're not more advanced, Morgan interrupted. They're differently advanced. Their technology evolved for single-purpose combat. Honor duels, clan warfare, conquest. Ours evolved for survival in environments actively trying to kill us, which meant we had to get creative. She pulled up a schematic of the Thessari warships. Look at these designs. Beautiful, efficient, purpose-built for fleet engagements. Every system redundant, every weapon optimized. They're perfect for the kind of warfare they understand. And what kind of warfare do we understand, Admiral? Chancellor Zhang asked quietly. Morgan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The desperate kind. The kind where you turn cargo haulers into kinetic missiles and mining lasers into weapons. The kind where civilian stations become part of the defense grid because everyone fights when survival is at stake. The kind where losing means extinction. So you use every trick, every advantage, every dirty tactic you can think of because honor is worth exactly nothing when you're dead. She let that sink in for a moment, watching the faces on the screens process what she was telling them. These were leaders who had lived through the resource wars, who'd seen humanity's capacity for creative violence when pushed to the edge. They understood what she was really saying. We're going to send them a message, Morgan continued. One more warning, clear and explicit. We'll tell them who we are and what we've survived. We'll give them one chance to turn around. She looked at each face in turn. And if they ignore that warning, we're going to show them exactly why apex predators don't need claws. The vote was unanimous. 6 hours later, Morgan recorded the transmission herself, standing on the bridge of the Endeavour with Earth visible through the viewport behind her. She wore her full dress uniform, every medal earned, every commendation displayed. She wanted the Thessari to see a human warrior, not a soft civilian. High Commander Eric, she began, speaking directly to the alien leader whose name they'd extracted from their transmissions. I am Admiral Sarah Morgan of the United Earth Space Command. I'm sending this message as a final warning and an offer of peace. We received your threat. We understand you see us as weak because we evolved on a gentle world. You're wrong. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We have survived ice ages, plagues that killed a third of our population, and wars that turned our cities to ash. We have survived everything our world threw at us, and everything we threw at ourselves. Morgan felt the weight of history behind her words, the long chain of human persistence stretching back through millennia. Turn back now, and we'll welcome you as friends. We'll share our technology, our culture, our stories. We'll show you that cooperation is stronger than conquest. But if you continue on this course, if you ignore this warning, you will learn exactly why nothing on our world could kill us. You will learn that humans don't have claws because we made better ones. You will learn that we don't need armor because we build it. And you will learn that the prey animals who survived everything became the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever known. She stepped closer to the camera. We don't want war, High Commander Eric. But if you force us to fight, we will show you what 4 billion years of evolution and 10,000 years of warfare have taught us. We will show you what happens when you threaten the survival of a species that learned survival is all that matters. You chose to see us as prey instead of people. You chose poorly. Turn back while you still can." The transmission ended. Morgan stood in silence for a long moment, knowing what would come next. Okoye appeared at her side, his expression grim. "You think they'll listen, ma'am?" Morgan shook her head. "No. They've already decided what we are. They won't believe us until we prove them wrong." She looked out at Earth, at the homeworld humanity had nearly destroyed and then fought so hard to save. "Get everyone ready, Commander. They're coming, and they think they're coming for a training exercise. We're going to teach them a different lesson entirely. We're going to teach them that humans have only one rule when survival is at stake: win." The Thesari vanguard emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, like ancient gods descending upon mortals. 12 warships, each one a masterwork of military engineering, their hulls gleaming with that distinctive iridescent sheen that came from armor plating forged in the heart of neutron stars. The smallest vessel dwarfed anything humanity had put into space, bristling with weapon systems that could crack a planet's crust or boil its oceans. They arranged themselves in the traditional Thesari attack formation, the Claw of Supremacy, a configuration that had broken the defenses of 63 worlds. High Commander Eric stood on the bridge of the burning claw, his 4 arms crossed in satisfaction as the tactical display populated with data. The human defense fleet was gathering near Mars orbit, a pitiful collection of vessels that looked more like industrial equipment than proper warships. He counted 43 contacts, most of them converted civilian craft. Their largest vessel, the one broadcasting identification as the UESS Endeavour, measured barely 300 meters in length. His flagship was 4 times that size. "Analysis," Eric commanded, his subsonic voice making the deck plates hum. Kresh worked the tactical station with the eager efficiency of youth. "High Commander, human fleet consists of 12 military vessels of outdated design, 24 converted civilian craft, and 7 mobile defense platforms. Total estimated firepower approximately 0.37 of our Vanguard capabilities. Shield technology absent or minimal. Their formation pattern is defensive, clustered around their homeworld's orbital infrastructure. Prey animals protecting their nest," one of Eric's senior officers observed, mandibles clicking with amusement. "Notice how they huddle together. No aggressive posture, no challenge formation. They're already defeated, and simply don't know it yet." Eric studied the display more carefully. Something about the human formation nagged at him, a subtle wrongness he couldn't quite identify. The vessels weren't simply clustered randomly. They'd positioned themselves in overlapping fields of fire, each ship covering another's approach vector. Between them, gaps appeared in the formation that looked like vulnerabilities, but could just as easily be kill zones. It reminded him of something. The trap webs that tunnel spinners wove in Thesar Prime's deep caverns. Structures that looked like simple architecture until prey touched the wrong strand and found themselves paralyzed, wrapped, consumed. "They did receive my warning," Eric mused aloud. "They had days to prepare. What have they done with that time?" "Built fear, most likely," Kresh said. "Their media transmissions show widespread panic on the surface. Civilians evacuating from coastal cities, resources being hoarded, their leaders giving speeches about unity and courage. Standard prey species behavioral patterns when predators approach." Eric's combat glands pulsed, but not with the usual anticipatory pleasure. Instead, he felt something closer to unease. That human admiral, the one who'd sent the warning transmission, hadn't looked afraid. She'd stood on her bridge wearing her decorations of rank and spoken of survival as if it were a weapon. Her eyes had held something Eric recognized from his own reflection. the look of a warrior who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. "Advance the fleet," Eric ordered, pushing the unease aside. "Battle formation Delta. We'll give them one chance to surrender before we demonstrate the consequences of refusing Thesari authority." The Vanguard moved forward, engines burning with fusion fire that lit up the dark between worlds. As they crossed the orbit of Jupiter, the human fleet began moving as well, not retreating, but advancing to meet them. Eric felt his primary heart rate increase. Either these humans were braver than he'd expected, or they were too stupid to recognize their own doom. The distance closed. 10 million kilometers. 5 million. 1 million. Close enough now for visual contact. Close enough to see the crude welding where humans had mounted weapons onto civilian hulls. The patchwork armor plating that looked like it had been scavenged from a dozen different sources. "They're hailing us, High Commander," the communications officer announced. "On screen." The human admiral appeared. Same uniform, same medals, but now she wore a pressure suit beneath her uniform jacket. Ready for hull breaches. Ready for the violence to come. Behind her, Eric could see human crew members moving with practiced efficiency, faces set in determined lines. "High Commander Eric," Admiral Morgan said, her translated voice flat and emotionless. "You had your warning. You ignored it. What happens next is your choice and your responsibility. This is your last chance to withdraw." Eric felt his mandibles spread in what humans would have called a smile, though it was really a threat display, a prelude to combat. "Admiral Morgan, your courage is admirable, but courage without strength is simply the last gasp of those about to die. You have 43 vessels against 12. You have primitive weapons against technology refined through 1,000 conquests. You have soft bodies against warriors bred for war. There is no scenario where you survive this encounter." "You're probably right," Morgan said, and something in her tone made Eric's unease spike again. "We're outgunned, outmatched, out-armored. By every logical analysis, we should surrender." She leaned forward slightly. "But humans learned a long time ago that logic doesn't mean much when you're fighting for survival. We learned that the species that wins isn't always the strongest, or the fastest, or the best armed. It's the one that refuses to die." "Prey animal philosophy," Eric said dismissively. "You speak of survival as if it were an achievement. Survival is simply the absence of death, nothing more." "No," Morgan replied, and now Eric heard something dangerous in her voice. "Survival is what happens when you're too stubborn to accept death, too clever to fight fair, too desperate to care about honor. You wanted to teach us about the real galaxy, High Commander. Let me teach you something about humans. We don't need to be stronger than you. We just need to make victory cost more than you're willing to pay." The transmission cut. Eric stared at the empty hologram, processing her words. Cost more than willing to pay. It was such a foreign concept to Thesari thinking. Warriors paid any price for victory. Honor demanded it. To suggest that conquest could cost too much was to suggest that some prizes weren't worth having, which was inherently illogical. If something was worth conquering, it was worth any sacrifice. "High Commander," Kresh said urgently, "the human fleet is separating into 3 groups. Pattern suggests coordinated attack strategy." Eric watched the tactical display as human vessels broke formation. One group accelerated toward his Vanguard's port flank, moving faster than their engine profiles suggested they should be capable of. A second group began a slower approach from starboard, while the third remained near Earth, protecting the orbital infrastructure. "They're trying to divide our attention," an officer observed. Basic pack hunting tactics. They'll harass from multiple angles, attempting to create confusion. Then we educate them on the futility of pack tactics against superior armor. Eric said, all vessels weapons free. Target the port group first. Eliminate them. Then we'll deal with the others systematically. The Burning Claw and its sister ships opened fire. Plasma cannons that could melt through solid rock discharged brilliant streams of superheated particles across the void. Railguns firing projectiles at near light speed created lines of destruction through space. Energy weapons designed to strip shields and boil hulls in seconds lanced out toward the approaching human vessels. The humans scattered like prey animals fleeing predators, their crude acceleration driving them into evasive patterns that should have been impossible for vessels of their design. 2 ships weren't fast enough. Eric watched with satisfaction as the Sari fire found them, saw plasma scoring across their hulls, saw secondary explosions as external systems ruptured, saw ships lose power and begin tumbling through space. The vessels looked dead, but their crews had drilled for exactly this scenario, sealing pressure doors and switching to isolated backup systems before the main grid failed. First blood, Kresh announced. 2 enemy vessels destroyed. Remaining port group attempting to retreat. But they weren't retreating, Eric realized a moment too late. They were leading his fire away from something. The starboard group, the one approaching more slowly, had closed to within 50,000 kilometers. Close enough for kinetic weapons. Close enough for multiple launches. Kresh's voice carried actual alarm. Missiles, kinetic projectiles, and High Commander, I'm reading unusual energy signatures. Unknown weapon type. The tactical display filled with contacts. Hundreds of them. No. Thousands. The humans had launched everything they had. A desperate alpha strike that reminded Eric of how cornered Rachgnars would sometimes charge at their hunters rather than die cowering. Point defense active, Eric commanded calmly. Destroy the missiles. Evade the kinetics. Show these humans what proper military technology looks like. The Thessary fleet's defensive systems came alive, tracking and eliminating incoming threats with mechanical precision. Missiles detonated in brilliant fireballs that looked beautiful against the starfield. Kinetic projectiles, simple chunks of metal accelerated to absurd velocities, were vaporized by laser grids. Within seconds, the human attack had been reduced to scattered debris. Target elimination 97%, Kresh reported. Remaining projectiles pose no threat. Human attack completely ineffective. Eric felt his confidence return. This was what he'd expected. Desperate prey animals throwing everything they had in a final gesture of defiance before accepting their fate. The human admiral had spoken bravely, but bravery meant nothing without capability. Signal the humans, Eric ordered. Tell them their attack has failed, as we knew it would. Offer them one final chance to surrender before we... High Commander, Kresh's voice cracked with something Eric had never heard from a Thessari warrior before. Fear. The projectiles we destroyed, they're still broadcasting signals, and our communication network just went critical. We're experiencing massive system intrusions across the entire Vanguard. Eric's 4 hands clenched simultaneously. Explain. The missiles weren't weapons, Commander. They were delivery systems. Each one carried some kind of data payload. When we destroyed them, they released their contents directly into local space. Our communication systems absorbed the transmissions automatically, treating them as standard battlefield data. Kresh worked frantically at his station. It's spreading through our network. Infiltration code, adaptive algorithms, something I've never seen before. It's not attacking our systems, it's learning them. The tactical display began flickering, showing ghost contacts that appeared and disappeared. ship-to-ship communications filled with static. Eric felt his flagship shudder as systems began routing power through unusual pathways. "This is impossible," an officer said. "Information warfare on this scale requires years of studying enemy systems, understanding their architecture, finding vulnerabilities. These humans just met us days ago." Eric stared at the chaos spreading through his fleet and understood. The humans hadn't needed years to study Thesari systems. They'd needed only to understand the fundamental principle that all computer systems, no matter how alien, operated on similar logical foundations. They'd created adaptive code that didn't need to know Thesari architecture because it could learn Thesari architecture in real time, faster than any biological mind could counter. It was elegant, horrifying, and elegant. And it spoke to a kind of warfare that Thesari had never conceptualized because it required seeing technology not as a tool for honorable combat, but as something to be subverted, compromised, turned against itself. "Isolate all infected systems," Eric commanded. "Switch to manual controls. We'll fight this battle without computer assistance if necessary." "Aye, Commander. 3 ships are reporting complete system failure. The Devouring Fang, the Storm of Ashes, and the Blood Victory. All 3 are dead in space. No power, no communications." Eric felt something cold settle in his primary stomach. Not fear. Thesari didn't feel fear, or at least they weren't supposed to, but recognition. Recognition that he'd made the worst mistake a warrior could make. He'd underestimated his enemy. "The ships that went dark earlier," Eric said slowly. "The 2 human vessels we destroyed in the initial engagement. Scan them again." Kresh brought up detailed scans of the damaged human ships. They showed ruptured hulls, vented atmosphere, no power signatures, dead vessels tumbling through space. Except, "Hi, Commander. I'm detecting minimal heat signatures deep within the hulls. Not from engines or weapons. It looks like manual power routing, as if they physically reconnected systems by hand." Even as Kresh spoke, the tactical display updated. The 2 destroyed human vessels suddenly showed power spikes, emergency systems coming online, engines reigniting with fusion fire. They'd been playing dead. Their crews had trained for catastrophic damage scenarios, learning to operate in vacuum suits while physically bypassing fried circuits and rerouting power through emergency conduits. It was insane. It was desperate. And it was exactly the kind of tactic that only worked against enemies who expected their kills to stay dead. "Hi, Commander. The port group is coming back around. They're accelerating again. And the starboard group is launching a second wave of missiles. The orbital defense platforms around Earth are warming up weapon systems, energy signatures consistent with industrial mining lasers." "Hi, Commander. The Devouring Fang reports boarders. Human assault teams somehow crossed from one of the damaged ships. They're fighting through our corridors." The reports came faster than Eric could process them, each one painting a picture he didn't want to see. Humans turning their damaged ships into Trojan horses. Humans weaponizing their own industrial equipment because they'd never separated civilian infrastructure from military capability. Humans fighting in multiple dimensions: physical, digital, psychological, because they'd learned war not from ritual combat, but from the desperate necessity of surviving each other. Eric stood frozen, watching his perfect battle plan dissolve into chaos. The Thesari vanguard, which should have swept through human defenses like fire through vegetation, was instead struggling against an enemy that refused to fight by any recognizable rules. Ships he'd thought destroyed were rejoining the battle. Systems he'd thought secure were compromised by code that learned faster than his technicians could counteract. Humans were boarding his vessels and fighting with tactics no honorable warrior would consider, Ambushes, traps, using the environment itself as a weapon. One of his officers, a veteran of 40 campaigns, turned to him with mandibles spread in confusion. "Hi, Commander. What are our orders?" "The humans, they're not fighting like anything we've encountered before. They're treating this like survival," Eric finished, finally understanding Admiral Morgan's warning. "They're treating this exactly like the prey animals we thought they were. The difference is, we forgot that Earth's prey animals are extinct. The humans killed them all. Or they evolved into something else. Something that learned to hunt." Kresh looked up from his frantically working station, his young carapace gleaming with stress secretions. "Hi, Commander. We need to regroup. Pull back to a defensive formation, reassess our strategy. We can't fight like this." Eric wanted to refuse. Wanted to order his fleet to push through to show these humans that the Thesari warriors never retreated, never reconsidered, never admitted that any enemy could match them. But that path led to defeat. He could see it now, could see how the humans would exploit every cultural blind spot that the Thesari possessed. They would fight without honor, because honor was a luxury. They would sacrifice ships because ships could be rebuilt. They would use any tactic, any weapon, any strategy because in the end, the only thing that mattered was survival. "Signal the fleet," Eric said, the words bitter as acid on his tongue. "Defensive formation Omega. We pull back to the outer system, regroup. And someone get me detailed analysis on every weapon, every tactic, every capability these humans have demonstrated." He stared at Earth on the display, that beautiful blue world that had bred something far more dangerous than any hellscape. "We need to learn what we're actually fighting. Because Admiral Morgan was right. We chose poorly. We looked at them and saw prey. We should have looked closer and seen persistence hunters. The kind that follows wounded prey for days until it collapses. The kind that never, ever gives up." The Burning Claw began its retreat. 3 of Eric's 12 ships dark and drifting, compromised by humans who'd turned information into a weapon and desperation into strategy. Behind them, the human fleet regrouped, damaged but unbroken, preparing for the next engagement. And on Earth, 7 billion humans looked up at the stars and understood what their admiral had told them was true. They didn't need to be stronger than the Thesari. They just needed to make victory cost more than any warrior culture would pay. The outer system provided no sanctuary, only a clearer view of their predicament. Eric stood in the observation dome of the Burning Claw, watching his fleet limp into formation around one of Jupiter's moons. 3 ships dead in space, being slowly towed by their sister vessels. 2 more reporting critical system failures that would take days to repair. And all of them compromised, their networks infected with human code that his technicians still couldn't fully purge. Behind him, Kresh worked at a portable console, analyzing the battle data with the methodical intensity that had made him Eric's most valuable tactical officer despite his youth. The young Thesari's mandibles clicked softly as he processed information, a nervous habit Eric had learned to tolerate because it preceded some of Kresh's best insights. "Hi, Commander. I've completed the analysis of human weapon systems," Kresh said, his voice carrying an edge Eric hadn't heard before. Not fear, exactly. Something worse. Uncertainty. "The results are problematic." Eric turned from the viewport, from the distant blue gleam of Earth. "Show me." The holographic display materialized between them, showing schematics of human ships, weapons, infrastructure. Kresh manipulated the data with practiced efficiency, highlighting section after section as he spoke. "The mining lasers they used against our shields, commercial equipment, 13 years old, maintained by civilian crews designed to cut asteroids for ore extraction. The humans simply pointed them at us and adjusted the frequency modulation. The rail guns that punched through the scaled Victory's armor? Cargo haulers. Mass drivers meant to launch shipping containers between orbital stations. Again, civilian infrastructure repurposed within hours of our arrival. Eric studied the schematics, feeling something cold settling in his core. They didn't have a military fleet ready. They built one from whatever was available. Worse, High Commander. Kresh expanded the display to show Earth's orbital infrastructure in detail. Hundreds of stations, thousands of satellites, an intricate web of human construction surrounding their world. This is just what we can see. Long-range scans indicate similar networks throughout their inner system. Mars has 17 major installations. Venus has atmospheric research platforms that our analysts believe could be weaponized. The asteroid belt contains over 300 mining operations, each with industrial equipment powerful enough to serve as artillery. They built their entire civilization as a weapons platform, Eric said slowly, the realization crawling across his carapace like ice. Not intentionally, just as a side effect of being human. Our doctrine assumes military and civilian spheres are separate, Kresh continued, his mandibles spreading in what Eric recognized as professional distress. Warriors fight. Civilians support. The Thessari way for 10,000 generations. But humans, he gestured at the display, at the evidence of humanity's fundamentally different approach. Every human ship has a crew trained in basic combat. Every station has weapons. Every civilian knows how to fight because their history forced them to learn. They don't have a warrior caste, High Commander. They're all warriors, all survivors. Eric's communication implant chimed. Another report from his fleet, another problem cascading from their disastrous first engagement. He authorized the repair priorities with a gesture and returned his attention to Kresh's analysis. What about the digital infiltration? Have we contained it? Kresh's mandibles clicked 3 times rapidly, the Thessari equivalent of bitter laughter. No, High Commander, and we won't. The code they introduced isn't a virus in any traditional sense. It's adaptive, learning. Every time our technicians develop a countermeasure, the code evolves around it. The humans designed it to mimic their own approach to problem solving, flexible, creative, willing to try anything that might work. AI? Eric demanded. The galaxy had treaties about artificial intelligence, rules the Thessari enforced with religious fervor, because they'd seen what happened when machines started thinking for themselves. Not quite. More like guided evolution. The code follows parameters set by human programmers, but within those parameters, it can adapt faster than any static defense can counter. It's learning our systems in real time, mapping our network architecture, finding vulnerabilities we didn't know existed. Kresh paused, his young face showing strain. High Commander, the humans are inside our computers. They're watching us, learning from us, and there's nothing we can do to stop them without completely shutting down every networked system in the fleet. The implications hit Eric like physical blows. Without networked systems, the Thessari fleet would be reduced to individual ships operating in isolation, unable to coordinate, unable to execute the complex battle formations that made them masters of space combat. They would be fighting, blind, deaf, and mute, while the humans maintained perfect coordination through whatever quantum encrypted systems they developed. Show me their casualties, Eric ordered, needing to see something, anything, that suggested the humans had paid a price for their resistance. Kresh called up the data. Human losses scrolled across the display. Ships destroyed, stations damaged, casualties in the thousands. But the numbers told a story Eric hadn't wanted to see. For every human ship the Thesari destroyed, 3 more appeared. For every station they damaged, the humans evacuated the survivors and incorporated the wreckage into their defensive network. And the casualties, while significant by human standards, were nothing compared to what the Thesari had inflicted on other species. "They're willing to die," Eric said, understanding finally settling into his bones with the weight of absolute certainty. "Not for honor, not for glory, for survival. They'll sacrifice anything, anyone, if it means humanity continues." "Yes, High Commander." Kresh manipulated the display again, showing combat footage from the boarding actions. Eric watched human soldiers fighting through breached corridors, saw them using tactics that violated every principle of honorable warfare. Ambushes, traps, psychological warfare, using the ship's own systems against defenders, fighting in vacuum without hesitation, coordinating through hand signals when communications failed, adapting to every countermeasure the Thesari employed within minutes. One sequence showed a human squad trapped in a sealed compartment surrounded by Thesari Marines. Instead of surrendering or fighting to the death, they'd depressurize the section, used explosive charges to blow out the exterior hull, and escaped through the breach into space where they were picked up by a human recovery shuttle that had been waiting for exactly that maneuver. "They planned for boarding actions to fail," Eric said, watching the footage with sick fascination. "They sent people onto our ships knowing they might have to fight their way out through vacuum. What kind of species trains their warriors to expect that level of desperation? One that evolved on a world where failure meant extinction," Kresh answered quietly. "High Commander, I've been studying their history during the retreat. They've survived 6 mass extinction events. The last ice age ended only 12,000 years ago. They survived it by learning to control fire and hunt in coordinated groups. Every advancement in their technology came from necessity." Eric turned back to the viewport, to Jupiter's massive bulk and the distant spark of Earth beyond. "We thought they were soft because they made their world comfortable. We didn't understand that they only survived long enough to make it comfortable because they're the most adaptable, most persistent, most ruthlessly practical species we've ever encountered." His communication implant chimed again. This time, it was a priority signal from his sensor officer aboard the Scaled Victory, one of the ships still operational despite critical damage. Eric accepted the transmission, hearing the strain in his officer's voice immediately. "High Commander, we're detecting multiple launches from Earth orbit. Approximately 200 small craft moving at high velocity on intercept courses with our position." Eric's blood ran cold. "Classification? Unknown, High Commander. They're too small to be warships, but they're heavily shielded and moving faster than anything we've seen from human technology. Our analysts believe they might be..." The officer's words cut off as Kresh's console erupted with alerts. The young Thesari worked frantically, his mandibles spread wide in alarm. "High Commander, we're being illuminated. Multiple targeting locks from throughout the inner system. Earth orbit, Luna, Mars, the asteroid belt. Hundreds of sources all converging on our fleet." Eric accessed his own command interface, seeing the tactical situation dissolve into nightmare. The humans hadn't been preparing to defend Earth. They'd been building a trap, and the Thesari fleet had retreated right into it. Every mining laser, every mass driver, every piece of repurposed industrial equipment in the inner system was now aimed at Jupiter's orbit, at the Thesari position. And those 200 fast-moving craft launching from Earth weren't missiles. They were piloted. Their ramming, Eric breathed, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. They're sending 200 pilots on one-way trajectories directly at our fleet. Those craft are kinetic kill vehicles, guided by humans willing to die to take us out. High Commander, we need to move. Kresh's voice cracked with urgency. If we stay in formation, we're targets. If we scatter, we lose coordination. Either way, those kinetic impactors will... I know what they'll do. Eric cut him off, his mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapons platform, and they'd maneuvered the Thesari fleet into a position where every piece of that platform could fire simultaneously. The attack wouldn't be honorable combat. It would be mathematical, precise, overwhelming. The humans were fighting like they'd learned to fight, by making survival cost more than any enemy would pay. Signal the fleet, Eric ordered, the words tasting like defeat even as he spoke them. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, and get me Admiral Morgan. We need to talk before this escalates further. High Commander, the Code of Warriors forbids negotiation during... The Code of Warriors was written by Thesari who never fought humans. Eric's voice carried across the observation dome with rare fury. We've been using ritual combat rules against an enemy that evolved past ritual when their ancestors were still learning to chip stones into spearheads. Get me Morgan. Now. Before those suicide craft reach engagement range and we lose any chance at communication. Kresh moved to comply, but his mandibles clicked with concern. High Commander, if the Empire learns, we negotiated from a position of weakness. The Empire sent us here believing humans were prey animals, Eric said, watching the 200 human craft accelerating across his tactical display, each one carrying a pilot who'd volunteered to die if it meant protecting Earth. The Empire was wrong. And if we don't adapt faster than our doctrine allows, the Empire will receive 200 coffins containing what's left of this fleet. I won't sacrifice my warriors to preserve our pride. Contact Morgan. The communication channel opened within seconds, suggesting the humans had been waiting for exactly this call. Admiral Morgan's face appeared on the holographic display, her expression tired but determined. Behind her, Eric could see the bridge of what his intelligence officers had identified as humanity's command ship, a converted colony transport that shouldn't have been anywhere near a battlefield. High Commander Eric, Morgan said, her voice carrying the flat professionalism of someone who'd made peace with necessary violence. I assume you're calling about the 200 fighters currently burning toward your position. Suicide craft, Eric said bluntly. Kinetic kill vehicles guided by human pilots. You're preparing to sacrifice 200 of your people to destroy my fleet. Morgan's expression didn't change. We prefer to call them volunteer interceptors. And yes, every pilot in those craft knows exactly what they signed up for. They also know they'll be in weapons range in approximately 9 minutes. So I suggest we make this conversation count, High Commander. Eric felt Kresh tense beside him, felt the weight of every Thesari warrior in the fleet waiting for orders, felt the pressure of 10,000 generations of warrior culture demanding he respond with force. Instead, he did something no High Commander had done in 400 years of Thesari military history. He asked a human for terms. What do you want, Admiral Morgan? You've made your point. You're willing to die defending your world. You've shown capabilities we didn't anticipate. You've inflicted casualties we didn't expect. But surely there's a solution that doesn't require 200 pilots to turn themselves into missiles. Morgan leaned back in her chair, studying him through the holographic display with eyes that had seen too much combat. What we want is simple, High Commander. We want you to leave. Take your fleet. Take your wounded, take your dead, and go home. Tell your empire that Earth is not available for conquest. Tell them we're willing to trade, to share knowledge, to become partners in whatever galactic civilization you've built. But we're not willing to be anyone's training exercise. We're not willing to be dismissed as primitive or weak or unworthy of respect. And if I refuse? Eric asked, needing to hear it. Then 200 human pilots die, taking most of your fleet with them, Morgan said without hesitation. And the survivors face a solar system full of weapons all aimed at you. And if somehow you fight through that, you'll reach Earth, where 7 billion humans are armed and trained and absolutely convinced that extinction is preferable to surrender. You'll win eventually, High Commander. You have the numbers and the technology and the experience, but the victory will cost you everything. It will cost you so many warriors that your empire will be vulnerable to every rival species waiting for you to show weakness. It will cost you resources you can't afford to spend on a war of attrition against an enemy that's made attrition their specialty. And it will cost you whatever moral authority you claim in the galaxy, because every species will see footage of you slaughtering billions of humans who only wanted to be left alone. Eric looked at the tactical display, at the 200 human craft still accelerating toward his position, at the hundreds of targeting locks illuminating his fleet, at the vast network of human civilization spread throughout the Sol system. He thought about the code of warriors, about ritual combat and honorable victory, and all the traditions that defined what it meant to be Thessari. Then he thought about the 3 ships he'd already lost, about the warriors dead because he'd underestimated an enemy that fought without honor, specifically because honor was a luxury they'd never been able to afford. "Stand down your interceptors," Eric said, the words emerging before he could reconsider. "Give me time to consult with my officers and contact the Empire. We'll cease offensive operations while negotiations proceed." Morgan nodded slowly, her expression showing relief. She didn't try to hide. "The interceptors will maintain their approach vector until I see your fleet moving out of the inner system, High Commander. Once you're past the asteroid belt, they'll break off and return to Earth. Consider it verification of good faith on both sides." The transmission ended. Eric stood in the observation dome, feeling Kresh staring at him with mandibles spread in shock. Around him, the burning claw hummed with the activity of a fleet in crisis, warriors trying to understand why their High Commander had just backed down from prey animals. "Signal the fleet," Eric ordered, his voice carrying across the dome with quiet finality. "We're withdrawing to the outer system. All ships maintain defensive formation. No hostile actions unless directly fired upon. And someone prepare a detailed report for the Empire. They need to understand what we're actually facing here." "High Commander," Kresh said hesitantly, "the Empire will view this as failure, as cowardice. The Council of Claws will demand explanations for why we retreated from an inferior enemy." Eric turned to his young tactical officer, seeing in Kresh's face the same assumptions that had nearly destroyed them all. "Then, we'll tell them the truth. We didn't retreat from an inferior enemy. We withdrew from a superior one. Not superior in strength or technology, or any measure the Empire recognizes. Superior in the only way that matters in real war. The humans are more willing to die than we are. They'll sacrifice everything to survive. And against an enemy like that, there's no such thing as an honorable victory. There's only survival or extinction." The burning claw began its retreat, the rest of the fleet falling into formation around it. And on Earth, 7 billion humans watched those 200 volunteer interceptors begin their deceleration burns, watched the alien fleet withdraw beyond the asteroid belt, watched humanity prove that sometimes the most advanced civilization wasn't the one with the best weapons. Sometimes it was the one that refused to give up. The negotiations took 3 days. 3 days where Eric sat in the observation dome of the Burning Claw, watching the human interceptor fleet maintain position in the outer solar system like a sword hanging over his head. 3 days of transmissions back and forth with the Thessary Empire, of arguments and threats and demands that he resume the invasion immediately, that he prove human resistance was merely luck and desperation rather than actual capability. 3 days where Eric drafted and redrafted his report, trying to make the Council of Claws understand what he'd learned. That humanity wasn't weak because they lacked natural weapons. That being born on a paradise world hadn't made them soft, but rather had given them the leisure to develop something far more dangerous than claws or armor plating, the ability to turn anything into a weapon, to fight without rules, to make survival itself their ultimate doctrine. The Council's response, when it finally came, was exactly what Eric had feared. High Commander Eric of the Burning Claw. The transmission began. The Council speaker's mandibles spread in formal judgment posture. Your report has been analyzed and discussed. The Council finds your assessment of human capabilities to be inflated by temporary setbacks. Your request to negotiate rather than conquer has been denied. You are hereby ordered to resume offensive operations within 12 standard hours. Failure to comply will result in your removal from command and the dispatch of reinforcements under leadership that understands the difference between honorable retreat and shameful cowardice. Eric listened to the entire transmission without moving, without speaking, his claws tight against his sides in the Thessary posture that indicated absolute control over anger. Around him, the bridge crew pretended to focus on their duties while very obviously monitoring his reaction. When the transmission ended, Eric stood in silence for exactly 100 heartbeats. Then he turned to Kresh. "Signal the fleet," he said quietly. "We're resuming offensive operations in 11 hours. Give the warriors time to rest and prepare. This will not be a training exercise." Kresh's mandibles clicked in confusion. "High Commander, the humans will resist. Those interceptors are still in position. They've shown they're willing to—" "I know what they've shown," Eric interrupted. "Signal Admiral Morgan. Tell her I request one final discussion before hostilities resume. Secure channel. Just the two of us." The transmission connected 40 minutes later. Morgan appeared on the holographic display looking exactly as tired as Eric felt, her eyes showing the same exhaustion that came from spending 3 days trying to prevent a war neither side could truly win. "High Commander," she said with that human formality that always sounded slightly wrong to Thessary ears. "I was hoping your next transmission would be to inform me your empire had agreed to peaceful coexistence." "As was I, Admiral," Eric admitted, feeling Kresh and his senior officers stiffen at the honesty. "Unfortunately, the Council of Claws has ordered me to resume the invasion. I have 11 hours to comply or be relieved of command." Morgan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Then we're back where we started. 200 interceptors preparing to die. Orbital defenses ready to fire. 7 billion humans armed and waiting. You know how this ends, High Commander." "Yes," Eric said. "I do. Which is why I'm telling you this, Admiral. In 11 hours, my fleet will advance into the inner solar system. We will move in full formation toward Earth, and we will broadcast our approach on all channels so every human defense station and interceptor and orbital platform can track our exact position." Morgan leaned forward, her face betraying confusion. "You're warning us? Why?" Eric felt his mandibles spread slightly in what might have been a smile if Thessary had such expressions. "Because I'm Thessary, Admiral. Because my species has spent 10,000 years building a warrior culture based on honor in ritual combat and the belief that true strength is demonstrated through direct confrontation. Because I was taught that prey animals hide and predators attack openly. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. And because, in the last 3 days, I've realized that honor without wisdom is just suicide with ceremony. I don't understand, Morgan said, though her tone suggested she was beginning to. You will, Eric replied. In 11 hours, when my fleet advances and your defenses respond and the battle begins again, you'll understand. Until then, Admiral, I suggest you prepare your forces. This will be the final confrontation between our species. One way or another, it ends today. He cut the transmission before she could respond. The next 11 hours passed in a blur of preparation that felt like ritual. Eric walked through the corridors of the Burning Claw, speaking with warriors who had served under him for decades, seeing in their faces the absolute certainty that they were about to die. The council had given him an impossible order: resume an offensive against an enemy that had proven they would sacrifice everything to defend their home. The warriors knew what that meant. They were Thesari. They understood combat. What they didn't understand yet was why Eric seemed so calm. When the 11th hour arrived, Eric stood in the observation dome and gave the order. All ships advance to Earth orbit. Maximum acceleration. Battle formation. Weapon systems active but locked. Do not, I repeat, do not fire unless I give explicit authorization. The fleet surged forward, the remaining 9 Thesari warships moving in tight formation through the asteroid belt toward the inner solar system. Around them, human interceptors began their attack runs, converging from a dozen different vectors with the desperate determination Eric had learned to recognize. Human defense platforms lit up with targeting locks, weapon systems powering up, the entire solar system mobilizing to repel the invasion. And Eric sat in his command throne, watching it all, and gave no order to fire. High Commander, Kresh said urgently as the first wave of human interceptors entered weapons range. We're being targeted. Multiple missile locks, they're preparing to engage. Maintain course, Eric commanded. All ships hold fire. Shields at maximum. The human attack came in waves. Missiles and kinetic rounds and converted industrial equipment all slamming into the advancing Thesari formation, battering shields, scoring armor, exploiting every weakness that human technical knowledge could identify. Eric watched 3 more ships take critical damage, watched warriors die, and gave no order to return fire. High Commander, the fleet is requesting permission to engage, Kresh reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. We're taking casualties. We need to respond. No, Eric said simply. Maintain advance. Do not fire. The human assault intensified as the Thesari fleet pushed deeper into the inner system. Orbital platforms unleashed coordinated salvos that would have crippled a normal invasion force. The 200 volunteer interceptors that Morgan had held in reserve now joined the battle, each one targeting the Thesari command ships with the precision that came from knowing this was their last mission. The Burning Claw shuddered as something massive struck its forward shields, and Eric felt the ship list slightly before compensators engaged. On the tactical display, he watched human forces converging from every direction, watched the web of destruction tightening around his fleet, watched exactly what Morgan had warned him would happen. And still, he gave no order to fire. High Commander! Kresh's voice had risen to a shout now, professional control finally cracking. We're at 30% shield strength. The Molten Heart has lost main power. We're being torn apart and we're not fighting back. This is madness. Eric turned to look at his tactical officer, seeing in Kresh's face the same incomprehension that must have shown on every warrior's face throughout the fleet. You're correct, Kresh. This is madness. which is precisely the point. He stood from his command throne and walked to the communications station. Open a channel to Admiral Morgan. Maximum broadcast, all frequencies. I want every human in this system to hear what I'm about to say. The channel connected. Morgan appeared on the display, her expression showing equal parts confusion and calculation as she tried to understand why a Thessari fleet was advancing into certain destruction without fighting back. Admiral Morgan, Eric began, his voice carrying across the bridge and through the broadcast system across the entire human solar system. 3 days ago, I requested permission from my empire to negotiate peace with your species. That request was denied. I was ordered to resume offensive operations or be relieved of command. I have chosen to obey that order. As of this moment, the Thessari fleet is advancing toward Earth in full compliance with the Council of Claw's explicit instructions. He paused, watching Morgan's face as understanding began to dawn. Around him, his own bridge crew was realizing what he'd done, what he was doing, what this meant. However, Eric continued, my orders said nothing about fighting back. My orders said nothing about engaging human defenses. My orders were simply to advance. So I'm advancing. With shields up and weapons locked and absolutely no intention of firing a single shot. I'm advancing so that every human in this system can see what your resistance has accomplished. I'm advancing so that my warriors understand what it means to face an enemy that refuses to surrender. And I'm advancing so that the Council of Claws can watch, in real time, as their greatest military commander leads their finest fleet to destruction because they were too proud to admit that some species are too dangerous to conquer. The burning claw shook again, harder this time, and Eric felt the deck tilt beneath his feet. Damage reports scrolled across displays throughout the bridge. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, shield generators failing, secondary systems going offline. Around his flagship, the rest of the fleet was suffering similar devastation. Thessari warships taking hit after hit without responding, without fighting back, just advancing steadily toward Earth like a warrior walking onto their funeral pyre. You were right, Admiral, Eric said, his voice still calm despite the chaos erupting around him. When you said we'd win but the victory would cost us everything. You were right when you said humanity had made attrition their specialty. You were right about all of it. And I've spent 3 days trying to explain that to the Council. 3 days trying to make them understand that strength isn't measured by who has the biggest claws, but by who's willing to survive at any cost. He gripped the command rail as another impact nearly knocked him off his feet. They wouldn't listen, so I'm showing them. On the tactical display, Eric watched human forces intensifying their assault, watched his fleet's shield strengths dropping toward critical levels, watched warriors die in real time because he'd ordered them not to defend themselves. It was the most dishonorable thing a Thessari commander could do. It was also, he realized with absolute clarity, the only way to save both their species. Hi, Commander, Morgan's voice came across the channel, and Eric could hear the understanding in her tone, the terrible comprehension of what he was sacrificing. You're committing suicide. You're killing your own warriors to prove a point to your empire. Yes, Eric agreed simply. Because sometimes the only way to end a war is to show both sides what it actually costs. Your species learned that lesson the hard way, Admiral. Through your world wars and your cold wars and all the other conflicts where you killed each other by the millions until you finally understood that survival required more than just strength. It required wisdom. It required knowing when to stop fighting. The burning claw's main power flickered, and emergency lighting painted the bridge in red shadows. Eric looked around at his crew, at warriors he'd fought beside for decades, seeing their faces twisted with confusion and anger and dawning comprehension. My species hasn't learned that lesson yet, Eric continued. We've been warriors for so long that we've forgotten how to be anything else. We've conquered 100 worlds because no one could match our strength, our discipline, our absolute conviction that might makes right. And now we finally encountered a species that's stronger than us in the only way that matters. You're willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Another massive impact. And this time, the shield generators failed completely. Eric felt the burning claw shudder as something punched through the hull, felt atmosphere venting, felt his own ship dying around him. "So I'm showing the council what that means," he said, his voice steady despite the alarms blaring throughout the bridge. "I'm showing them what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object. I'm showing them that some wars can't be won, no matter how many warriors you're willing to sacrifice. And I'm hoping, Admiral Morgan, that once they see this, once they watch their finest fleet destroyed by an enemy we could have called friends, they'll finally understand what you tried to tell them 3 days ago. That there's a difference between strength and wisdom." The transmission from the council came exactly when Eric expected it. "High Commander Eric," the council speaker's voice erupted across every channel, mandibles spread in fury that translated clearly even across species barriers. "You will cease this action immediately. You will engage the enemy. You will fight." Eric smiled, a human gesture he'd learned from watching Morgan's transmissions. "No, Council Speaker, I won't. You ordered me to advance on Earth. You didn't order me to fight. You didn't order me to win. You ordered me to advance, and that's exactly what I'm doing. If you want me to fight, you'll have to give me new orders, but those orders will have to include authorization to negotiate a ceasefire, because I won't sacrifice my warriors in a war we've already lost." The silence that followed stretched for exactly 17 heartbeats. Eric counted them, watching the tactical display show his fleet's positions moving inexorably toward Earth, watching human defenses tracking their approach, watching the gap between the two forces shrinking while the council tried to process what their greatest commander had just done. "You are requesting authorization to negotiate?" the council speaker finally said, the words emerging like they were being pulled from deep water. "No," Eric corrected gently. "I'm demanding it. Because in approximately 6 minutes, the human fleet is going to finish destroying my shields and start killing my warriors in numbers you can't afford to lose. In approximately 11 minutes, whatever's left of my fleet will be close enough to Earth that their planetary defenses will turn us into debris. And in approximately 18 minutes, the Thessari Empire will have lost its most experienced military commander, its finest ships, and any chance of peaceful relations with a species that could have been our greatest ally." He paused, letting that sink in. Around him, the burning claw was dying, systems failing, warriors abandoning stations that had become death traps. Through the observation dome, he could see human interceptors moving in for final attack runs, could see the massive Earth defense platforms tracking his position, could see humanity's entire military apparatus preparing to finish what the Council's pride had started. "Or," Eric continued, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute clarity, "you can authorize me to request terms. You can admit that we made a mistake. You can acknowledge that humanity deserves respect rather than conquest. And you can prove that the Thessari Empire is wise enough to know when to stop fighting." Another silence, shorter this time. Eric watched the tactical display count down the seconds until his fleet entered the kill zone, watched human forces adjusting their formations, watched the end approaching with the inevitability of dawn. Then the council speaker's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of fury and leaving only exhaustion. "You have authorization to negotiate, High Commander Eric. Request terms from the humans. End this." Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Admiral Morgan," he said, turning back to the human transmission, I formally request a ceasefire. My fleet will hold position and power down weapon systems. I'm prepared to discuss terms for our immediate withdrawal and the establishment of peaceful relations between our species. Morgan's face showed a complex mixture of emotions: relief, triumph, exhaustion, and something that might have been respect. Hold position, High Commander. I'm dispatching rescue vessels to assist with your damaged ships. We'll discuss terms once I know your wounded are being treated. Admiral, that's not necessary. Yes, it is, Morgan interrupted firmly. Because, unlike the Council of Claws, humanity learned a long time ago that how you treat defeated enemies determines what kind of civilization you become. Your warriors fought because they were ordered to. They're not our enemies. They're victims of the same pride and stupidity that nearly destroyed our own species. So, we're going to save as many of them as we can, and then we're going to sit down and figure out how to make sure this never happens again. Eric felt something shift in his chest, some fundamental understanding clicking into place. The humans weren't just willing to die for survival. They were willing to save enemies who'd tried to kill them. They weren't just strong. They were wise in ways that the Sari had forgotten, if they'd ever known it at all. Thank you, Admiral, he said quietly. I accept your terms. The next hours became a blur of organized chaos as human rescue vessels swarmed through the crippled Thessari fleet, as medics who'd been preparing to treat their own casualties instead focused on saving Thessari warriors, as the species that had been fighting to extinction moments before now coordinated damage control and emergency evacuations. Eric watched it all from the Burning Claws auxiliary bridge, the main command center having been abandoned when life support failed, and felt something like awe at humanity's capacity for compassion. Morgan arrived on the Burning Claw 6 hours after the ceasefire, accompanied by a small security detail and a medical team that immediately began treating wounded Thessari warriors without waiting for permission or thanks. She found Eric in what had been the observation dome, now open to vacuum and visible only through the emergency airlocks that had sealed it off. Hi, Commander, she said, her environmental suit's speakers carrying her voice clearly despite the damage. Or, should I say, former High Commander. I imagine the Council wasn't pleased with your tactics. Eric's mandibles spread in that almost smile. Actually, they promoted me, apparently demonstrating that humans are too dangerous to fight without being too dangerous to alienate completely is considered strategic genius rather than madness. Though I suspect the promotion is partly to keep me from saying publicly how close we came to total destruction. Morgan studied him for a long moment. You saved both our species, you know. If you'd kept fighting, if you'd actually engaged when you advanced, we would have won, but the cost would have been significant, and your empire would have sent reinforcements. It would have turned into exactly the kind of grinding attrition war that destroys civilizations. I know, Eric said simply. I've studied human history. Your World War I, your World War II. All those conflicts where both sides kept fighting long after it was clear that victory wasn't worth the price. I didn't want that for either of our species. So you found a third option, Morgan observed. You didn't surrender because that would have shown weakness to your empire. You didn't fight because that would have killed us both. You just advanced and forced everyone to watch what that actually meant. Sometimes the best way to win is to show your enemy what losing actually costs, Eric agreed. You taught me that, Admiral, 3 days ago, when you told me exactly what would happen if we kept fighting. You didn't threaten. You didn't bluster. You just explained, very calmly, that humanity would die before surrendering and that the cost of that victory would destroy us. I believed you. The council didn't, so I showed them. Morgan nodded slowly, then gestured toward the burning claw's shattered hull, the debris field that surrounded them. The human rescue vessels moving between Thessari ships like white blood cells healing a wound. What happens now, High Commander? Now? Eric turned to look at Earth through the broken observation dome, at that blue-green jewel that humanity called home, that paradise world that had somehow produced the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Now we write a treaty. Now we establish trade relations and cultural exchanges and all the things civilized species do when they're not trying to kill each other. Now we teach each other things. You teach us how to survive against any odds. We teach you how to maintain honor without it becoming suicide. And together, we become something stronger than either species could be alone. He paused, watching a human medic carefully loading a Thessari warrior onto a stretcher, despite the size difference and the danger of those claws. And now, I spend the rest of my life trying to explain to young warriors like Kresh that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's turning them into a friend. The treaty negotiations took 3 weeks, with Eric and Morgan leading their respective delegations through careful discussions of trade rights and territorial boundaries and all the complex machinery that civilization requires. The Council of Claws initially demanded reparations for the Thessari ships lost in the battle, until Eric pointed out that those ships were lost because he'd ordered them not to fight, which made the Council itself responsible for those deaths. After that, the negotiations became considerably more cooperative. The final treaty, broadcast simultaneously on Earth and across the Thessari Empire, established what became known as the Thessari Human Accord. Earth and its solar system were recognized as sovereign human territory, trade and cultural exchange were established between the two species, and most importantly, both civilizations agreed to share military technology and tactical knowledge under a mutual defense pact that acknowledged neither species could truly defeat the other. But, together, they were effectively unbeatable. Eric watched the treaty signing from his position on the burning claw, which human engineers had helped repair enough to make it space-worthy again. Beside him, Kresh observed the ceremony with mandibles spread in what Eric had learned to recognize as confused fascination. "High Commander," Kresh said quietly, "I don't understand. We lost. We retreated. We suffered casualties and gained nothing. How is this a victory?" Eric considered the question, thinking about all the battles he'd fought in his long career, all the worlds conquered and enemies defeated and victories celebrated. Then he thought about the human medic who'd saved his life when the Burning Claw's command deck lost atmosphere, who'd risked vacuum exposure to drag him to safety, who treated an enemy commander with the same desperate care as their own wounded. "We gained everything, Kresh," Eric said finally. "We gained allies who are too strong to conquer and too valuable to alienate. We gained access to human technical knowledge and tactical thinking that will revolutionize our military doctrine. We gained proof that the Thessari Empire can admit mistakes and learn from them. And most importantly, we gained the wisdom to know that some battles can't be won by fighting." He gestured toward the holographic display showing the treaty signing, showing Admiral Morgan and the council speaker clasping hands in the human gesture that signified agreement. "That's not a defeat, Kresh. That's evolution. That's our species learning to be something more than just warriors. And 50 years from now, 50, when the Thessari Human Alliance is the most powerful political force in the galaxy, you'll understand that the greatest victory I ever won was the one where I never fired a shot." Kresh's mandibles clicked in uncertainty, but Eric could see understanding beginning to dawn in his young, tactical officer's eyes. It would take time, he knew. It would take a generation of warriors learning that strength without wisdom was just violence with ceremony. But they had that time now. They had the chance to become something better. 6 months later, Eric stood on Earth for the first time, invited as part of a cultural exchange program that brought Thessari observers to human universities and military academies. He walked through the streets of Geneva with Morgan as his guide, feeling the Earth's comfortable gravity, breathing air that smelled of growing things and rain and life, seeing thousands of humans going about their daily lives without fear of conquest or invasion. "Your world is beautiful, Admiral," Eric said, watching children play in a park that had been rebuilt after being converted into an emergency defense station during the battle. "I understand now why you fought so hard to defend it." Morgan smiled. That human expression Eric had learned meant genuine happiness rather than showing teeth in threat. "We would have fought just as hard if Earth was a barren rock, High Commander. We weren't defending the planet. We were defending each other. That's what you didn't understand at first. Humans don't fight for territory or resources or glory. We fight for the people we love. Everything else is just details." They walked in silence for a while, this unlikely pair. The Thessari warrior who'd learned that the greatest battle was the one you chose not to fight, and the human admiral who'd proven that survival required both strength and compassion. "I've been asked to stay on Earth," Eric said eventually, "to serve as permanent Thessari liaison and help coordinate the military alliance. The Council wants me where I can't embarrass them again, but they're pretending it's an honor." "And will you accept?" Morgan asked. Eric looked around at the human city, at the civilization that had somehow survived ice ages and plagues and world wars, and their own worst instincts to become something remarkable, and felt his mandibles spread in what was definitely a smile now. "Yes," he said, "because I think I have more to learn from humanity than they have to learn from us. Because I want to understand how a species that evolved without natural weapons became the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. And because I want to be here when the next warrior species decides Earth looks like easy prey, so I can watch you teach them the same lesson you taught me." Morgan laughed, and the sound carried across the park where human children played without fear. "What lesson was that, High Commander?" Eric watched those children, thought about the 200 interceptor pilots who'd volunteered to die rather than surrender, thought about the billions of humans who'd prepared to fight with whatever weapons they could improvise, thought about a species that had somehow learned that survival required both the capacity for total war and the wisdom to show mercy even to enemies. "That humans have only one rule when survival is at stake," he said quietly, remembering Admiral Morgan's words from that first confrontation. "Win. But you taught me a second lesson, Admiral. One that might be even more important. You taught me that winning doesn't always mean defeating your enemy. Sometimes winning means turning them into a friend. Sometimes winning means showing them a better way. Sometimes winning means proving that strength and compassion aren't opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin." He turned to face her directly, giving the formal Thessari salute that indicated respect between equals. "Thank you for not destroying my fleet when you had the chance. Thank you for saving my warriors when you could have let them die. Thank you for showing the Thessari Empire that there's a difference between being strong and being cruel. And thank you for teaching me that the most advanced civilization isn't the one with the best weapons. It's the one that knows when to stop fighting." Morgan returned the salute in the human style, hand to forehead, showing respect across species boundaries. "You chose to learn, High Commander. That takes its own kind of courage. Welcome to Earth. welcome to the Alliance, and welcome to the beginning of something neither of our species could have achieved alone. Above them, in the skies that had been contested battlefields 6 months ago, Thesari and human ships now flew in coordinated patrols, protecting Earth from threats that both species had learned to recognize. And across the galaxy, other warrior cultures looked at the Thesari-human accord and began to reconsider their assumptions about which species made the best conquerors versus which made the best allies. And Eric, standing on Earth with the sun warming his scales and human children playing nearby, understood that the Thesari Empire's greatest fortune wasn't that they'd survived their encounter with humanity. It was that they'd been wise enough, eventually, to stop fighting and start listening.